Firefighters of Reddit. What's the dumbest way you've seen someone accidentally start a house fire? The old turkey fryer on the wood deck is always a favorite. In the city of Colorado Springs, the local news did a fluff piece about candle safety near Christmas. After they were done filming, the store owner that they were filming in took the crew out to breakfast. She didn't put out the candles and burned several shops to the ground. The film crew was there to film her breakdown when they realized what caused the fire. I worked for a restoration company. A family cut a small tree down and tried to stuff it up their fireplace to burn. The flute was so crammed with leaves that smoke started to fill the living room. They tried to pull the tree out and that's when it really caught fire. They tried to pull it out of the house. They got as far as the front door. All of them had second, third degree burns on their hands, arms, and the fire destroyed the front room and entryway of their house. The insurance company asked us if we thought it was a case of fraud, and we told them no, these people are just really stupid. A Roomba knocked a scented candle over and set fire to the rest of the room. The guy said he knew the Roomba did it because he watched the whole thing happen, but didn't do anything because he thought it was funny. Teenager was charcoal grilling in the attached garage during the winter. When done, he decided the best place to dispose of the hot coals was into a cardboard box in front corner of the garage closest to the house. Yeah, it went about as well as you can imagine. When my father-in-law was a kid, he really wanted to have a campfire. His parents told him no. He was determined to have a campfire, so he went up to his room and started one under his bed so they wouldn't know. I keep that knowledge in my back pocket for whenever he wants to imply I'm an idiot. My dad was a firefighter, and he once went to a house fire that was started by the old lady who lived there. She liked to burn candles, but didn't like the wax buildup that would form in the cavity, so she would soak up the liquid wax with a napkin. She was doing this when she accidentally brushed a wax-soaked napkin up against the flame. She panicked and threw the napkin into the trash, where all the other wax napkins were. As the trash can exploded into flames, she fled the house, but not before she went to her oxygen tanks and flooded the house with pure oxygen, because she thought that it would smother the fire. I am a firefighter, but this wasn't in my district. A guy was attempting to forge a sword in a burn barrel in an alley, based on something he watched on the History Channel. The embers from the forge lit up the building he lived in and destroyed 3 multi-family residential buildings. Not a house fire, but really good. Late 1980s. Guy was driving an old beat up Lincoln. He turned a corner to go up a steep hill, but the road depth had recently ground the asphalt down in preparation to repave. A storm sewer manhole cover was sticking up about 4. As he went over it and up the hill, the rear of his car dragged due to the pavement height difference, and the manhole ripped open his fuel tank and sparked off the gas. Guy described it. I heard a scraping sound, looked in the mirror, and there was this trail of fire chasing me up the hill, like I was the road runner. He pulled into a gravel parking lot and tried to kick a brake in the trail before the fire got there, but it jumped the gap and led the car. By the time we got there, it was a total loss. He actually thought it was kind of funny. The only real loss was his wife's purse, with her license and credit cards. The car was insured, and they got a pretty nice payout for it. This happened this past fall, but a family had a fairy house that was outside, right next to their woodside house. The fairy house was made out of an old tree and had a bunch of decorations in it, including incense candles. One evening, they decided that they would light the candles for the fairies, which then caught the tree on fire, which then extended into the house. Since it started on the outside, it ran up the side of the house and got into the attic and second floor. The family was home, but in the first floor while this was happening. It wasn't until someone driving on the road saw the smoke and went to alert the family. Luckily, we were able to save the structure. There was a bit of damage to the roof, attic and second floor, but the homeowners are rebuilding those areas. In college a girl in the dorms was making popcorn which, not sure how but somehow, caught fire in the microwave. She didn't want to get into trouble for it, so she grabbed the flaming bag of popcorn and threw it into the nearby trash can, then proceeded to cover the fire with paper towels* to smother it. She actually thought it would work. It did not work. I came back exhausted after work to find the dorm building surrounded by fire trucks. Not a firefighter, but the apartment building I lived in at the time caught fire because all my neighbors smoke and throw their cigarette butts into the ground, which happened to be fresh mulch, before going up the steps. The mulch caught fire which lit the siding on fire. No one's fire alarms went off. Someone driving by saw the smoke, stopped, ran and pulled the fire alarm. But it was only connected to the buzzer in the breezeway, not the fire alarms in the apartments. All bedrooms are in the back of the apartments, so no one heard it or woke up. He ran past the flames and banged on everyone's doors to wake people up. Fire department came and put out the fire pretty quick. It never got very big. I also caught the whole thing on my truck's dash cam, but can't find the video now. It was just one more thing that got us to leave apartments for good. Too many stupid people. Based on the stories from relatives, the answer is by allowing 10 years worth of Drylin to accumulate inside the machine until it just burst into flames. It was not an isolated case. Forgetting to close the bottom of your grill, then going overboard with the lighter fluid. My father was a Boston firefighter for 30 years. One of his more memorable stories was a foreign family who had ripped up their cast iron bathtub and built an open flame underneath the tub. They used the tub as a giant oil fryer. Naturally this didn't work out very well, and the house caught fire. To add to the insanity even more, the family absolutely refused to let my dad and his coworkers in without taking their boots off, which of course, they couldn't agree to. Just crazy. Removed. Was in my local paper. Turned out to be my friend's older brother. He tried to smoke out bees in the loft and set fire to the insulation in the loft and burnt the whole house down. I was a chef before I was on a volunteer fire department for a bit, and this was at a restaurant down the street from my old one. Cooks at this restaurant forgot to plug the drain in the deep fryer. So what happened was they put oil in a fryer, which drained immediately, right before lunch. Turned on the empty fryer, and that's when the coils caught fire. So not only did they spill 5 gallons of oil, burn a fryer, fill a restaurant with smoke, and kill the service day. This was the second time it happened. Edit. Grammar fixes. Clarity. My uncle is a firefighter. The answer is Christmas trees. They dry out. They become a ticking time bomb. He used to do an annual demonstration where he'd let a Christmas tree dry out for a few months, then take it outside and ignite it. The flames would shoot 40 feet in the air and the tree would be gone in a few seconds. It was mightily impressive to behold. And I'm sticking with artificial trees. Firefighter here. One extremely cold night, the temperature was 11 wind chills. 40s. This guy tries starting a fire in his fireplace and couldn't get it started. He decides to use gasoline. Dumps 1.2 gallon on the firewood, stacked by the door, and the other 1.2 onto the wood in the fireplace. As he attempted to light the fire, he couldn't get the lighter to work. Now the vapors are really starting to build. He then goes to the kitchen, which adjoins the room with the fireplace, to use the stove to light some newspaper. As soon as he turned the knob on the stove, the igniter lit the gasoline vapors. The living room was instantly on fire. The vapor singed all his hair and got first-degree burns on his hands and face. We on the other hand spent the next few hours in the extreme cold. Flash ahead 3 hours. The firewood outside has somehow ignited, and we had to go back. The second fire had some time to really grow. Middle of the night. Everyone in bed, no one around. Longest, coldest night of my life. All because some fool decided to use gasoline to start a fire indoors. Not a firefighter, but I set my parents' bathroom on fire while getting up from the toilet. My mom used to leave potpourri simmering in a small bowl on the back of the toilet with a candle to heat and stew it just below. As I was getting up, I somehow knocked the apparatus off the back of the commode. We had carpet floors in that bathroom and that section of the floor caught pretty quickly. The fire then found a seam in the wallpaper and ignited the glue fairly easily as well. As the flames rose, it caught the roll of toilet paper on the way up the wall, which really accelerated things. All this took 30 seconds. And I remember being somewhat mesmerized at the path the flames traveled. I also remembered that I had flushed the toilet before realizing what had happened. I somehow thought to grab the toilet bowl brush, shove it into the commode to get it wet, and then beat out the flames. The aftermath was surprisingly minimal. The small section of carpet was destroyed, but my parents replaced the carpet everywhere a few years later. The wallpaper wiped clean with some hot water and a rag. And thankfully there was only a little permanent smoke damaged on the ceiling, which has seemed to fade over time. Family friend decided to make major renovations on their home with no background in construction and carpentry. They also didn't bring a professional to ensure that their renovations were up to fire code. Lo and behold, an exposed wire sparked a fire in the middle of the night and burned down their entire home. They have 3 kids and are very fortunate they all were able to escape the fire without any injuries. And to make matters even worse, they had no house insurance. Extreme libertarians that don't believe in insurance debt. So they ended up having to rely on a GoFundMe fundraiser set up by a relative to recover financially. Last I heard, they were still living in a hotel trying to figure out their next plan of action. This story alone reaffirms my belief that some things are better left to the professionals. Even if you're trying to cut costs, it might be best to pay a little extra to have someone with experience do something for you instead. This avoids terrible situations like this. Mid-80s. Near beginning of my career, young lady finished putting fleece spray on her pupper when she noticed a tick embedded in its flank. Ever hear of the tick removal technique, in which you blow out a match and touch the hot tip to the tick, thereby causing it to back out of the dog? Yeah. Dog caught on fire. Little fellow ran under the bed, which also caught fire. Lady grabbed the pup with spray, wet hands, and they too caught on fire. Long story short, the house was a mess. But both the lady and the dog fortunately survived with moderate burns. There was also the lady who tried to sanitize her panties in the microwave. But I was off that day. Not a firefighter, but happened in my building. In India generally you have small praying place in your house. Like a little version of a temple. You lit diya lamp every day and pray there. In this particular case the family decided to keep this thing on a Fukin refrigerator. The diya fell behind the fridge due to wind from the window adjacent to it. The condenser caught fire and literally exploded. The whole floor was on fire. Luckily no one was home. It really was a dumb decision to keep a temple on a Fukin fridge. Not a firefighter, and it wasn't in a house, but on a certain mall here in Monterrey, Mexico. We have a freaky plaza. A little mall where all the geeks, gamers and otakus go to, and on the second floor someone was smoking while playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Since he didn't want to throw his ashes on the floor and the trash can was too far away from him, he decided to make a paper ashtray. Yeah. That didn't work out well. Especially when 3 of his friends decided to use it to. So, here in Argentina we have El Cordero a la Cruz. Aka cooking a whole lamb with open fire. Well, it just so happens that pines are really flammable. And if you make an unprotected fire in a floor covered in pine leaves near a blooming pine. Once my neighbor stole 15 propane tanks and decided to make a DIY blowtorch. By neighbor I mean he lived below us. We were giving him our basement. He almost lit the house on fire, but then he tripped on something and fell over. The next morning we looked and saw it had burned a little bit but not much. He was also very drunk that day, too. Once we lived in a basement suite and the people who lived above us were making toast at 2 AM and they used a fork to get it out, but the fork hit something, so the toaster caught fire and my mom tried to wake me up, but I just pulled my blanket over my head and said I just want to sleep a little more, and then my mom said the house could burn down, and I was the first one out of my house. My neighbors forgot they had ferrets inside. We grabbed our dog, but they didn't grab their ferrets. The fire department came, but my neighbors could have put out the fire if they unplugged the toaster and putting baking soda on it. Not a firefighter, but the apt building I stayed in had a pretty good fire. A guy threw a lit cigarette in a coffee can full of butts. It was on the far end of the building from us. So my upstairs neighbor and I got to stay. Everyone else had to move. We were dealing with water leaks for almost a year after that. It took them that long to sort out insurance stuff and make repairs. Finally put on a new roof a few weeks before we moved. Someone tried to make a gummy bear lamp like in iCarly to test it really gonna burn. And then his house was on fire. Mr. Homie Arwana was attempting to deep fry tater tots in a saucepan of oil on a gas stove. The oil frothed up when the frozen tots hit the surface, igniting the whole thing. Mr. Homie Arwana then proceeded to try to grab the pan by the handle and swing it over to the sink, but I imagine it was like a Vietnam era napalm run. Well, he managed to spread the fire across the linoleum floor and in panic let go of the pan, launching it, the remaining burning oil, and tots into the laundry basket which was full of freshly dried clothes. In the ensuing panic, Mr. Homie Arwana thought he could try to get the flaming laundry basket out to the back porch. Well, he only managed to knock the flaming basket off the table, and it tumbled off the table and straight down the basement stairs, leaving a nice trail of burning oil-soaked towels all the way down. Now Mr. Homie Arwana decides to make egress out the back kitchen door, down the stairs to the backyard. He slightly missed the stairs, hit his bare right foot on one of the railing posts, breaking a couple toes, and flew forward off the staircase, managing to impale himself onto a bit of rubber that was protruding from a cement block they were using as a sort of barrier on the edge of the cement patio. There he stayed, clad only in boxer shorts. He managed to nick his liver pretty bad, but survived. Did I mention he had burned his legs up pretty bad as well? So, the smells and smoke and the screams of Mr. Homie Arwana at finding himself stuck through with a rusty piece of iron alerted Big Mama, Mr. Homie Arwana's girlfriend, and punk teen kids number 1 and 2 upstairs, that something was afoot. As far as we could tell, Mama went looking for the kids or the dogs. Both dogs made it out. Girlfriend made it out, and down the stairs, over the raging laundry, oil fire 1 flight below. She found Mr. Homie Arwana on the back patio, bleeding and turning grey, screaming and trying to get off the pike. The punk teen kids, with the dogs, climbed out a side bedroom window to the side porch roof. The older punk teen kid, about 16 years of age, managed to tumble off. He didn't land well. I think he ended up breaking his arm really bad. The dogs and the younger one got pulled off that roof by the neighbors. Mama apparently had a significant cardiac event and fell over. She happened to do so in the junk room, a sort of Kalir Brothers style room filled shoulder high with stacked boxes of junk. By the time we got in there, it was just a charred, soaked mess of black slop about waist deep. We had to dig Mama out of it. That was wretched. All of this had attracted the attention of the many foreign laborers who were living in the boarding house next door. They helped the best they could, but also became a very raucous audience. A few of them were bomberos voluntarios back in Guatemala, and having an entire company of mostly non-English speaking valets show up intent on going to work made things very interesting. 2 of those guys saved Mr. Homie Arwana's life though. I have never, in my 27 years of doing this, arrived on a scene of such screaming and chaos. Edit. Paragraphs for you. Tobias Kilograms. News article I read. One guy had a fish bowl in his garden shed. Sunlight was focused through the bowl, through his kitchen window. Woomph. My partner's a firefighter. He said the dumbest one was where a man tried to barbecue in his basement. His reasoning: I don't want to go outside and risk exposure to coronavirus. It would be safer to do it here in the basement. I have been a firefighter for 20 years. The dumbest way I've seen a house fire start was when people squatting in a basement decided that a space heater would be handy in drying their clothes. Then they waited 15 minutes before calling for us, trying to put out with a garden hose into the basement on a 5-degree night. They burned down their home and the one next door. Not a firefighter, but I read a story about a woman that started a fire because her firefighter friends were bored. They had 2 candles. And yeah, one thing led to another, and they burned down their home gym. There was a show in the UK called 999 Lifesavers. There was one episode where some kids were sticking around with an old oil barrel. One tipped oil over himself, so he went to dry himself by their campfire they'd started and wait. What? Anybody else here a ducking idiot just here to learn things to avoid doing? My neighbors recently burned their house down emptying an ashtray before they went to bed. They have since quit smoking. My father lived in a rented apartment. The landlord lived in the apartment beneath him. My father had switched the fuse off the oven off because he had done some electrical work. He also put some receipts on the oven. In the meantime, the landlord saw the flipped off fuse located on the basement and flipped it on. We wondered why it smelled burned, and we discovered that the oven was on and had burned the paper to ash. Amazing. It did not really burn. The paper just turned to ash. You could even still read some words, but if you touched it, it just turned to dust.